What is going on, guys? Welcome to the first official solo Basement podcast. My name is Carlo. I am one of the founders of Basedment, and there is so much we have to talk about right now. There's so much going on in the Middle East, but before we get to that, I just want to lay a few foundations first. Number one, I want to say thank you guys from the team at Basedment. Without you guys, we would not be where we are right now. Many of you have been there since the start, and we are approaching our 12-month anniversary since this project started, and it's been a crazy 12 months of growth, and we can't thank you guys enough. But I can guarantee you guys that these next 12 months will be just as big, and we have a lot of things planned. We've been listening to your feedback, and some of the biggest feedback you've been telling us is you guys want long form content, so here we are. It's going to be a bit of rough around the edges as we get used to everything, so bear with us, but we can guarantee that this is going to be a really, really big year for us. So once again, thank you again. Second of all, I just want to quickly explain how these podcasts will most likely work moving forward, so we can skip these intros and just get into it like a bit more naturally. All right. The major talking points of the podcast will be arriving from our newsletter, which thousands of you guys already subscribe to. But if you're not, this is a bit of a plug, but I'm telling you, it is some of the best valuable information you can get. It's daily and it's free. You are not losing anything besides gaining more information. So we're going to be using this podcast to delve deeper into our deep dives, no pun intended. All right. And yeah, so definitely do sign up to that, because it's just going to give you a much wider context to what's happening around the world. Another thing is, obviously, this is a geopolitics podcast, so we will be talking about all the major world events. And I'm thinking there's no better way to start the first episode than to talk about what is going on in the Middle East right now. So I'm thinking, shall we get into it? Shall we get started? Episode number 1 of the Basement podcast, the situation between the USA and Iran. Let's go. This is the largest US buildup since 2003. Who would have thought a few years ago that we'd be hearing this? Like, we have more than 1/3 of the US Navy right now in the Middle East. Absolutely crazy scenes going on right now. And there are a lot of questions that everyone's been asking us. And I want to frame this podcast just to help sort of answer some of these questions. Question number 1 that a lot of people have asked us: is the US going to strike? Most analysts, including me, I believe that the strikes are almost certain unless the Iranians can pull off some sort of Hail Mary throw, right? And I'll explain why, right? Most analysts, again, like I said, agree that there is a strike happening. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Ironically, and finally, the most obvious evidence we have that a strike is happening is that the US Navy is in the Middle East. Sounds obvious at first, but if we take a bit of a closer look and we just understand the sheer size of this, like the sheer size, and I'll just give you a quick rundown what we have. We have 2 aircraft carriers. So we have the USS Ford. Let me just pull up this map quickly. Beautiful. Okay, quick map I've just sort of pulled up that we can use. We have the USS Ford, which is in the Eastern Mediterranean by the time this video releases. And we also have the USS Lincoln, which is somewhere in the Indian Ocean right here, just trying to stay out of that missile range of the Iranians at the moment. We have more than 200 fighter jets have been sent over in the last few weeks, from F-22s, from F-15s, F-16s, A-10s are making a comeback, man. Crazy stuff. F-18s, F-35s, right? We're seeing a significant amount of air defenses being shipped over from the US and Europe to the Middle East, right? We're talking about THAADs, we're talking about Patriots, everything that we've sort of talked about before, okay? Tankers, more than 100 tankers have been sent over, and by tanks I mean the aerial refuelling tankers. And in the past few weeks alone, we have seen more than 150 US military cargo flights happen, sending resources, hardware, you name it, it's being sent over. And even just in the last few hours, we're seeing significant amount of resources being shipped over right now, but I'll get into that in a moment. We're also seeing intelligence and surveillance aircraft being sent in an unprecedented amount. We're talking about E-3 Sentries. More than, I believe, half the operational fleet is in the Middle East right now. Okay. And why am I listing all these things? Because there are some people saying that the Iranians can make a deal and then this is a big threat, right? The reason I would say that this is not a threat is because if it was, it would be an extremely, extremely expensive threat. For example, just quickly, the F-22s, for every hour of flying they do, there is more than 30 hours of maintenance work done on them, right? Applying stealth coating, and ensuring that it's all up to standard. For 1 hour of flight, I believe it's costing between 30 to 40,000 USD per hour of flight time just for these F-22s. And we're not even talking about everything else, from the F-35s, etc., the 2 aircraft carriers, whatnot, right? We also have 12 warships, at least. They are primarily guided missile destroyers and cruisers, all right? Obvious reasons for strike capabilities on Iranian installations. So again, if this was a threat, it's a very expensive threat. If this was a threat again, you would not need to be sending 8 E-3s over. You would not need to be sending 24 F-22s, right? And then just to continue on, just within the last 48 hours alone, now actually it'll probably be around 72 hours, we've seen over 100 aircraft arrive, right? And this is an important point. Is the US going to strike? Okay, to answer this question, let's take a look back to Operation Midnight Hammer last year, when the F-22s arrived for that operation, within 4 days, the operation had launched. The F-22s for this operation, if it does happen, they have probably arrived in the last 48 hours. So we have another 48 hours if we're going to base it off Operation Midnight Hammer. And if we just look at a bit of the timeline of what's going on, the next biggest question is, when will they strike, if a strike is definitely confirmed? Some of the sources that I've been reading in regards to Iranian channels, they've been saying that the strike could happen within the next 24 hours. The surveillance and information gathering aircraft that I mentioned, such as the E-3s, the E-11s, the E-2Ds, whatnot, they all sound like Star Wars and droid names. But I'll apply a few images later in the post edit so you can see what I'm talking about. They have already been conducting flights around the Middle East the last couple of days already. So they are actively gathering information for strikes. All right, so things seem to be in motion, at least in the preliminary stage. Okay. Another important thing that we can look at is Trump will be giving State of Union speech this Tuesday, American time. Will he be striking before, during, after? If we look at Trump's sort of personality, it does make sense. It does make sense. He wants to make this big show. He wants to make this big show of things. And some questions that I've also been receiving is, when is the USS Ford going to arrive? By the time that this video releases, the USS Ford, if you quickly go back to this map, we will see that it should be somewhere around the Eastern Mediterranean. However, in saying that, it is operational in terms of the scope of what's going on with Iran. It is operational from about once it reaches Libya, which it should have already. Okay, so the USS Ford is almost ready to go. If it does launch out of Libya or Egypt, for example, that's not really an issue, because aerial refuel tankers can refuel the F-16s and whatnot out of Cyprus, somewhere over the Middle East, to help support this operation against Iran. So it seems that in terms of US military assets, everything is ready to go. Everything is ready to go. But in the last few hours, right, there has been a massive Air Force air bridge, a new one, right? There was a bit of a quiet in the last 24 hours, but in the last few hours, we're seeing 9 Boeing C-17 Globemasters are currently en route to the Middle East. And just for your information, guys, I will have all the sources that I'm reading off right now. So a single C-17 carries 77 tons of payload, an absolute crazy amount, right? 9 of them carry roughly 700 tons of munitions, and there is around 40 aerial refueling tankers currently operating as well. All right. So what does this mean? Again, if this is a threat, if this is some sort of big threat, why continue to keep sending these things over, right? Like why continue to keep sending hardware and reinforcements in terms of munitions for air defense batteries? why continue doing that? Why continue doing that? That's why I don't think that this is simply going to be a threat. This is most likely going to be a multi-week operation on Iran. And yeah, to get a better understanding of everything and just how this is all going to work, the timeline of this is important. I want to quickly go over the timeline that I've sort of written here. What we have is on February 19th, Trump said 10 to 15 days we could expect some sort of strike if a nuclear agreement is not reached with Iran. On February 19th, 50 plus fighter jets are moved within 8 hours. On February 20th, the USS Ford transits Gibraltar. Okay, it enters the Mediterranean. On February 20th, Trump aboard Air Force One says he's considering limited strikes. February 21st, hundreds of personnel are evacuated from the Qatar airbase at Al Udeid airbase. Sorry, I probably butchered that name. I do apologize. February 21st, Iran says that EU militaries are terrorist organizations. February 21st again, Axios reports Trump has been presented with options to strike the supreme leader directly. And we will get into that in a moment. Very important, very important. February 22, Senator Graham publicly urges Trump to override advisors pleading against strikes. And if you're thinking that there is a united effort to strike Iran, think again. We've discussed this in our newsletter before. There are two groups in the Trump administration. There is the traditional Republican, I guess you could say, group, which would be under the umbrella of Marco Rubio, who is definitely on board for strikes against Iran, and Pete Hegseth as well. However, you have this new group. Which fits under the umbrella of JD Vance, which are the America First isolationist group. They're saying even though Iran has been a big rival of the US and Israel, it is simply not worth it for us to get involved. We have to focus on ourselves. If we take a couple weeks back, the Wall Street Journal was reporting that JD Vance was able to convince Trump, at least at that moment, to go for a negotiation route rather than a strike route. And that is why we saw JD Vance in Oman with the Iranian team, right? Has anything really happened out of these negotiations? I really don't think so. Will anything happen? I don't really think so. Again, if there's some sort of Hail Mary, you never know in geopolitics. Geopolitics is crazy stuff. Analysts are very commonly wrong because we can only see what we are being shown at face value. There are multiple levels of negotiations and talks happening that we will never know of, right? February 22nd, this is what I was just talking about right now. 9 C-17s have been confirmed carrying weapons in the direction of the Middle East. Now, so again, to sum that up, things seem to be in motion. And I will also say we have two other sources just in the last few hours. Witkoff was on Fox News actually saying that Trump is not sure why Iran hasn't given up yet. Why hasn't it agreed to the red lines? So to give some credence to those guys that were talking about threats being a possibility, it seems at least at some point there might have been this might have been a threat. Let's say when it was just the USS Lincoln fleet. But now we've moved past that. And Witkoff says it on Fox News that Trump is frustrated that Iran hasn't given up yet. Okay. This could be a insight into a possible green light that we haven't seen, at least publicly. Secondly, John Kiriakou, and hopefully I've said his name right. He's the famous CIA whistleblower. According to his sources, we should be seeing strikes by Monday, US time. Tuesday, US time. Now, with John Kiriakou, he has been I wouldn't say anti-US, but he has been outspoken against the US establishment, especially the intelligence establishment. So take this with a bit of grain of salt. And I don't mean that in a negative way on him, but when it comes to Iran especially, you guys have to understand that there is an active propaganda war happening from both sides, and Iran has a lot of regional enemies, Israel being the primary one, but the Gulf states, Turkey, a lot of regional enemies Iran has. And what that means is that there is a concentrated effort to show anti-Iran news, but also at the same time to also distract, distort, and just have a bunch of disinformation. That way no one is sure of what's meant to be going on. So always consider that. And I've made this warning before, especially during the height of those protests that we saw last month or about a few weeks ago. You need to be very careful when dealing with sources that are coming out of Iran, because you have to also always consider that this may be disinformation. All right. Again, especially with Iran, considering just how many rivals it has and how powerful these rivals really are. So it seems that there's a consensus. That strikes are going to happen within the next 24 hours to 48 hours. Everything is set up. Just to summarize, everything is set up in terms of US military assets. Everything is ready to go. Everything is there, ready to strike. Other sources such as John Kiriakou and Iranian channels are saying strikes next 48 hours. Witkoff is sort of hinting that Trump is frustrated and could be ready for a strike. And yeah, there were officials leaks saying that strikes are going to happen in March. Again, I think this is part of that distraction campaign, both for the open source groups and also for the Iranians themselves, just to keep everyone guessing. Another question that everyone's had is, what will strikes look like? At the moment, it seems that most likely there will be no boots on the ground, right? It seems that this will be a multi-week operation. We have to go back to the scale of this. More than 200 fighter jets. We have 2 aircraft carriers, hundreds of Tomahawk missiles with all these destroyers and cruisers. This is a multi-week operation, right? We also have to look back at last year, the 12-day war. Without a doubt, there will be Israeli and US intelligence operatives operating inside Iran. Iran also is not as united as it wants to be, as the regime would want it to be, right? So there will be many civilians, citizens, maybe even military personnel that do not agree with the regime and that are happy to give information to do sabotage against the regime for US and Israeli intelligence. We saw evidence for that. I mean, it was released by the Israeli intelligence of them targeting all the missile launchers with drones, whatnot, from inside of Iran. The Iranian media themselves have released, again, take this with a grain of salt, but they have released these compounds, for example, in Tehran, where operatives have been working for the Israelis to build drones. That way they can target military installations and whatnot. Iran made a big show of that, and several people were executed, hanged, whatnot. So that's a big consideration to consider. Now, another thing that people haven't really considered, that isn't really talked about enough, is Israel. This US fleet is ginormous. It's the biggest since 2003. But we're also not including the Israeli Air Force, which is going to play a dominant role in Iran, especially Western Iran, where, again, if we look back to last year, the 12-day war, what's going to prove vital, and I can't really zoom in anymore, unfortunately, but what's going to prove vital for Israel is Syria, funnily enough. Why Syria? Syria used to be aligned with Iran under Assad, and what Iran was able to do was it was able to use Syria as a bit of a shield. So Iran had set up radar systems in Syria, that way to give early alerts to any sort of Israeli actions against Iran in the air through their F-16s and whatnot. Okay, but in the last 2 years, Israel has been targeting these radar systems, and as we all know, the Assad regime is no more. The current Syrian government is very hostile to Iran, so Iran has sort of lost that. They've lost that shield, and they've lost that early access vision to any sort of Israeli air movement in the sky. And I do believe as well that there was activity out of Azerbaijan as well. So if we look at the route here, we go through Syria, Azerbaijan to the north, and again, it just complicates the defense for Iran. That's a major thing to consider. it was the way that the Israelis were able to send in the F-16s so quickly without issues last year, because Iran is sort of blind in the West. There's another issue which we will discuss, but Syria used to be the linkage between Hezbollah and Iran, but now they've lost that connection. It's really made it difficult to resupply Hezbollah, but we will get into that. All right. Now, in terms of a US focus strike, what we're going to be seeing again is we're going to be seeing sabotage groups operating within Iran at the same time as electronic warfare systems. Look at what happened against Maduro as a clear example. The obvious goal here will be to paralyze an Iranian response for as long as possible, right? And just to keep them guessing for as long as possible, whilst it gives the US Air Force a window into striking air defense systems with both missiles from ships and the Air Force. And that will be the first stage, I would say. So the first stage would be to first paralyze Iran for as long as possible to create that window. That way the Air Force and ships can target the air defense systems. And if we look over here, I'll try to pull up a... I do have a map over here. I do apologize. I'm just going through a bunch of... Okay, so here we go. So can I zoom in? Beautiful. Amazing work done by this fellow. What's his name? Chris Schmitz. I will link everything in the bio so you guys can have a look at yourselves. But look at the concentration here. A massive, massive concentration along western Iran, where most of the main cities are, and the capital, and then we have a large concentration in the coast. Again, this makes sense, right? These are the most vulnerable and important locations that Iran has to protect. The eastern side is less so defended, but still enough, right? Iran's thinking is, if any strike is going to happen, it's going to happen again, like we discussed, out of Syria, so northwest over here, and against this strait. Which means, why not bolster up the front line, the frontal approaches as much as possible, instead of just relying on a more scattered approach inwards. And I will sort of explain everything more in detail about the Iranians and then what their response will be. But I just do want to come back to the US for a moment. We can expect immediate strikes, like I said, on air defense systems. I believe primarily what we're going to be seeing is strikes on the S-300, S-200s, Russian systems that the Iranians use. Why? Because they have the longest range and their radar systems are able to pick up a lot further than, let's say, some of your more traditional SAM systems, right? Once the air defense systems are neutralized or at least paralyzed, we will then start seeing strikes on the launcher platforms and systems. The thing that makes Iran very hard to subdue is that they have these underground cities, if that's what you can call, where all their major missiles are kept underground underneath mountains. Iran is desert and mountainous. Historically, it has been very hard to cross. The Romans have tried, they failed. Alexander the Great had massive struggles here as well. This is a mountainous area and very rugged, right? So you have all these underground facilities scattered across the country from west to east. Very hard to locate, but not impossible, especially given that in last year's war, Israel was able to successfully target the western areas through their operatives, which we saw from both drone strikes, Air Force airstrikes, and also, again, like I said, operative. But they weren't able to really target the east, mainly because of the logistical reasons, having to cross over western Iran. While still having some sort of air superiority, it still carries a lot of risk to keep heading more and more east with your F-16s and whatnot. They will be the second most important target. The goal is to neutralize the capabilities of Iran, and Iran has pretty much backed itself into saying our main deterrent is going to be our missiles, right? But that carries its pros and cons. After these launch platforms are targeted, we could at the same time or afterwards, we will then begin to start seeing strikes on command centers, military installations, and whatnot. We could be seeing a decapitation event as well, right? It depends. It depends on what the overall goal for the US and Israel is with Iran. I know Iran would most likely like to see a balkanized Iran, like a fractured Iran. That way its main rival is just permanently fractured and does not pose a threat. That's what Israel would like to see. I don't think Trump would want to see that, right? I think Trump is just being sort of pushed along by Israeli officials and whatnot, and some of those more diehard Republicans. But in saying that, if Trump tries to go for a decapitation event, we will most likely see a much more coordinated strike package where a lot of things are happening at the same time. We might even see some special forces action. There was an unconfirmed rumor, if we go back a couple weeks, there was an unconfirmed rumor of a special forces flight heading to Azerbaijan or Georgia. Take that with a grain of salt as well. This may be just disinformation at the end of the day, right? So, second question, what would an Iranian response be? Like I said, the main weapon, the main deterrence that the Iranians have is their ballistic missiles, and they have thousands of them. They have the largest in the region and some of the largest in the world. All right, very large inventory. Their second major weapon will be their drones. Russia and Ukraine, should I say, have both proven the effectiveness of drones in several ways, right? Number one, drones act as a diversion. So you send the first wave, second wave. A lot of these drones that we saw in the 12-day war, they didn't really have any explosive munitions in them, right? They were just diversion drones. So Israel has no other choice, for example, to sacrifice their ammunition on these drones, because even though this drone is not packing a massive payload, if it does hit a battery or whatever, it will cause significant long-term issues. So we're most likely going to see some sort of drone swarms, first wave, second wave, at the same time or right after. We're going to see those missiles be launched as well. We did see video footage. This just came to the top of my mind. We did see footage of a Shahed drone recording and transmitting data of the USS Lincoln a few weeks ago before it was shot down by US forces. But what that shows is that the Iranians do have the capability to do surveillance, right, without the need of Chinese and Russian satellites, which we will get into. But it shows that they can transmit that data back as well, which is very important for reaction times to strikes and whatnot. Okay. The hidden trap card that the Iranians have are their hypersonic missiles. As of right now, there is no publicly known way to stop a hypersonic missiles, because they just travel so fast and they pack a punch. As I say this right now, the Russians have launched 8 hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, so they are very effective. And what will they be used for? That's a big consideration. 2 obvious targets will be the carrier fleets, right? So the USS Ford and the USS Lincoln, but also US air bases as well. They have the Fatah 2, which is the main hypersonic that the Iranians have. It has an estimated range of around 2,000 kilometers, right? That is very significant. The USS Lincoln, I believe, for it to be involved in this operation, will need to be, hopefully my map works again, we will need to be within 1,000 kilometers at least, right, of the nearest Iran military installations. Okay, so we have missiles, ballistic missiles to be exact, thousands of them. We then have drones, right, and the Iranians have been a long time investor in drone technology and drone strategy, so we definitely will be seeing more of them. And then again, the hypersonics. But the problem with all this, the problem with Iran is that it's just simply hard to tell. It's simply hard to tell. The biggest determining factor will be whether the Iranian military apparatus was able to rebuild itself after the 12-day war and was able to learn from mistakes. The second point is very important, right? if the Iranians were able to learn from their mistakes, that makes their response time and their capabilities a lot more efficient, and a lot more deadly as well. We do know, based off satellite imagery, that they have been prioritizing rebuilding their missile facilities instead of prioritizing their nuclear facilities, which honestly, that makes sense, right? The nuclear program is a long-term program. It's going to be the main target. So why spend precious resources and money rebuilding these sites if they're even salvageable? Who knows? When instead you can be focusing on the immediate priority, which is being able to have a deterrence package in place, which will be their ballistic missiles. And like I said, they have very strong underground defenses. Their facilities are packed throughout all of Iran. Very, very difficult to spot. Very difficult to spot, but not impossible to spot. All right. And now what I wanted to bring up, this was very interesting. This is what I wanted to bring up is we had a few sort of questions, and I've been reading about this the last few days. What would Russian or Chinese support look like? I'll start off with Russian. I personally don't think we're going to see major support per se. Russia, by all means, is currently bogged down in the largest conflict since World War II in Europe. They simply do not have the resources to help Iran in a substantial way and in such a short amount of time as well. What they can assist Iran on is with satellites and hardware, especially for their S-300s and S-200s, okay, which I will get into. And again, overall, probably we're not going to see much from Russia besides some very mean words. And that's just the reality of it. That's one of the issues that Iran is having, is that they've hedged their bets with Russia, but the Russian-Iranian relationship has always been, I wouldn't say complicated in a negative way, but it is not as cozy as, let's say, as two Western nations would be. The problem with autocratic governments is that there is always a sense of, how would I call it? There is never a lot of trust placed into allies, especially not rivals, but allies, right? If you can even call the Iranians and Russians allies, I would say they're aligned in their worldviews, this multipolar world and whatnot, but I wouldn't go as far as to call them allies as a lot of people that support Iran would wish, right? The current Iranian regime. China is more of an interesting one. China has publicly said more so that it will back Iran, and we do have proof of this. Since the 12-day war, Tehran has reportedly purchased systems like the Chinese YLC-8B, bit of a tongue twister of a name, radar system. Okay, they're very good at detecting stealth aircraft at around 100 to 200 kilometers, right? And they're more so focused on low observable aircraft, which makes them good as a combined response in the short term, but not something that is more important. Let's say, for example, if a destroyer out of the Indian Ocean is launching a missile at Iran, you would want a radar system that can see that from 500 plus kilometers away, 300 kilometers away, rather than having to wait for it to reach the outskirts of Iran before you can do something. So it's an improvement, but it's not a game changer that some guys on X have been talking about, that these super new Chinese radar systems will change everything. I don't think so. Iran has comparable systems of its own, right? But the issue with that is, and I will just keep going back to the 12-day because it's such an important aspect of all this. Recent satellite imagery has been released, and I have that here. That was released. I'm trying to find the original source here. Sam Lair was using open source satellite imagery to find, very interestingly, S-300 launches in Iran. Okay, this is near Tehran. Why is this interesting? Because Israel had previously stated, I believe, that they had destroyed all the Russian missile launch systems that the Iranians have. Clearly proves to be not true. The Iranians still have them. So they haven't all been destroyed. I believe there's at least 3 batteries that they have of the S-300s and a couple S-200 batteries, which will most likely be placed in Western Iran. The problem with this image, though, and what other analysts were bringing up, is that there's no radar system here. There are no radar systems to be seen, whether they're being hidden on purpose or not. We're going to have to see. For those people that don't know, when it comes to these radar systems, when it comes to air defense system, it's not just a missile launcher. You have various support vehicles and support equipment, as we can see in this image over here, and you have the radar systems that are linked to the launcher, right? Without the radar system, the S-300 launchers are pretty much blind, okay? They can't target, they can't identify. And this is why it's important that the Iranians had reportedly bought these Chinese radars, because that was a primary target of the Israeli Air Force and the sabotage groups. It was these radars. Without radars, you are blind in the sky. So what we can expect is a very similar response to last year, where you see drone swarms and missile strikes. That is all dependent on how much Iran wants to go down swinging, per se, right? At the moment, all the odds are stacked against them, right? But if they're going to go down swinging, it's going to be a very tough thing for the US, especially with the hypersonics. But it's all going to be determined on how much the Iranians have. Like, how many missiles do they have left? I know they have thousands, but how many missile launch systems are operable, right? After last year's strikes. If we look over here, and like I wrote down some notes on just some other issues with the Iranian focus on the missiles. Hopefully it shows up over here. Okay, so these are some of the notes I wrote down. Number 1, it takes 30 to 60 minutes to reload a missile launcher using cranes. That's a big problem. Because it opens up a window for orbital surveillance, right? But this is the case with everything. Like, this isn't just an Iran problem. This is with any type of major missile battery. You're going to be being able to see that. There is a massive thermal signature. There's a massive thermal signature for the, for these missile launch platforms. And again, it's going to be very easy to spot, right? Iran is the most surveilled country on the planet right now. These things are an issue. They are slow to launch. They are slow to reload. So that means we're going to be seeing like a shoot and scoot type thing, where the Iranians are going to be trying to shoot as fast as possible, go back into their underground facilities, which are hidden, and then come out again, right? Without trying to be found out as fast as possible. And what about the Iranian proxies? If I go back to the map, the Iranian proxies are very interesting. We'll start off with Hezbollah. Like I said earlier, Syria was the link between Hezbollah and Iran. Iran has been a massive supplier and supporter of Hezbollah for decades now. And Syria being aligned to both, it was very easy for Iran to smuggle over resources into southern Lebanon for Hezbollah. Since 2024, we have seen that cut off now. So Hezbollah is almost cut off from Iran, not totally, right? But in a substantial way. Don't expect a massive rearmament program from Hezbollah. And if I'm going to be honest, what major strategic role have they played in the last 2 years? Like, have they turned the balance of the war with Hamas and Israel? Not necessarily. Did they pack a punch? Yes, they have, but not in a strategically relevant way, at least for now, right? If we go down a little bit, we have the Iraqi militias. The Iraqi militias have, for the most part, been unscathed for much of the conflict in the last couple of years. They did launch drones out of Iraq, and they can do that to sort of distort the response times and just understandings of where strikes can be happening from. But again, in a strategic sense, how much can it really do besides target US air bases? Not too much, right? And then we have the Houthis. If anyone's going to be a major assistance, I would say it's these guys. Whatever your views about them, you have to admit these are some tough mother effers, man. These guys have been in it for a while and they're truly committed to the cause. We have seen that they can launch missiles that can reach Israeli airspace through the Red Strait, even at the height of when the US Navy was in the Red Sea. They were still able to launch this missile and it was able to reach Israeli airspace. Several times it has come close to this region up here. What they can do is they can threaten to target ships again, which they already have been doing, but to block off the Red Sea, causing economic issues, and also spread the US Air Force and Navy thin to cover this problem down southwest. Okay. They can also target the USS Lincoln and that fleet there with their missiles. But the overall problem though is that these proxies work great. These proxies work great when you as a state are in this sort of Cold War situation. So Iran was at its peak during the Shia Crescent, right? So the Shia Crescent stretched from Hezbollah, Syria, Iraq, Iran, all the way down to Yemen. They were at their height when Iran was not focused on themselves. The main priority for Iran right now is arguably survival. So all resource allocation is going to be with Iran, and it's not going to be to their proxies. That's the reality of it. So I don't expect too much. It just does not make sense to, first of all, risk sending important hardware and munitions to a group like Hezbollah when it can be used to defend Tehran, for example, right? This causes another problem. With Iran focusing on itself, these proxy groups have to look at this pragmatically. If the ship begins sinking, and I'm not saying it will, but if it does, we have to consider whether these proxy groups are going to go down swinging with Iran. If they're pragmatic about it, I doubt many of them will, especially the Shia militias, which are many of, and tribal groups, right? I doubt that they will go down swinging with Iran because they're going to be looking at their own survival, their own regional survival. Hezbollah as well, right? At the end of the day, it is a Lebanese organization. They need to look out for themselves. Do they want to cop the brunt of the Israelis? Possibly not, most likely not. In saying that, just to go back earlier, the Israelis have already begun targeting Hezbollah. And not to say that they haven't in the last few months, but is this a preemptive sort of strike to try and neutralize Hezbollah in case Iran does activate these proxy groups? We will see. I know eight leadership officials were targeted in the most recent strike in the last 24 hours. So yeah, that's overall, the Iranian response is complicated, I would say. We don't know too much about what is happening. We do know that they're prioritizing their missile facilities, which means they're most likely stockpiling missiles. If you're someone that supports the regime, you would hope that Iran has learnt from its past mistakes and try to integrate it and optimize its systems as much as it can, right? The Iranians operate a very dense air defense network. But again, how operable, how powerful is it still after the 12-day war? We haven't seen too many radar installations anywhere off satellite imagery. We've seen these S-300 launches, which may even be decoys. We don't know. Iran does have a layered defense, which means it has long-range air defense systems. It has medium-range air defense, and it has a close range. And by close range, we're looking at like some classic anti-aircraft guns. But it's going to depend. It's all a big mystery. We can only speculate on Iran. And maybe the last question is, what is Iran waiting for? If we go over here, where's my cursor gone? It's gone here. If we go over here, hold on. That's the Iranians. Okay, boom. So these are F-18s, I believe, that are underground, that are under reinforced hangars. But there is another image. I want to see if I can sort of go back. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is in Jordan. This is the Jordan base right now, the Al Salti Air Base in Jordan. Look at this, man. This is a easy target for a quick ballistic missile, right? Quick ballistic missile, possibly even a hypersonic missile, hundreds and millions of dollars in damage. I believe these are F-35 just sitting out in the open. Why hasn't Iran responded? One thing I would say is we have to consider how united is the Iranian leadership right now between the military apparatus and everything that's been going on in the last few weeks. How united are they in a response? If hypothetically Iran was to respond, and this is a possible issue, if Iran was to respond, what we're looking at is a preemptive strike which could possibly trigger a living hellstorm of the US onto Iran, right? This could give the justification for the US to go absolutely mental on Iran. And that's the thing we have to consider. Are they worried about that? Secondly, if the longer that a strike takes to happen between the US and them, the more time the Iranians have to prepare, I would also say, right? Every minute right now counts for the Iranians. If we look at the nuclear deal talks right now, I would even say that there's a high possibility that the Iranian team is just trying to buy enough time, as possible. And again, Iran, ideologically, it can show itself as the victim of US aggression to its own people, to Shia Muslims abroad and whatnot, and it's defending itself against the US, right? It's defending itself against the US. So there's that reason, right? But they definitely could. They definitely could. And in some respects, you would think that the US military is even waiting for it, right? Overall, in terms of Iranian strength, a good indicator that Iran still does pack a punch is the fact that this kind of image exists, right? That there is so many US air and naval assets in Iran that in the Middle East, that the US do not want to have any gaps at all. They want this to be a minimal casualty operation and maximum punch because they know Iran can still pack a punch, right? And, just to summarize everything, I think I've covered enough for the first episode. Again, like I said, a bit rough around the edges. Is there anything else? Oh, there was one more thing I would like to say, because I did see this making the rounds. Which is very, very interesting. The last meal before strikes in Iran, why US military's lobster steak feast might be bad for Khamenei. If you're not sure what the significance of this image is, I'll give you a bit of context. This has been making the rounds in the last 24 hours. This image itself, we have steak, lobster, and cake on a undisclosed US Navy ship, right? Historically, before a major operation is about to go down, the US sailors, the Marines, anyone who's going to be involved in the operation, they get a very nice meal, and it's historically been lobsters, cakes, steaks, all the good stuff that they usually wouldn't be getting day to day, and that's just to boost morale. Take this with a grain of salt. That's a statement I will keep saying when it comes to Iran. It could be propaganda, whatnot. Why do I say this? Because I saw this image, not this exact image, but I saw something similar circulating last year, and the attacks did not happen for several months around this when that image had been released. It was very similar to this. It was lobster or cake or something. So yeah, very interesting times. Very, very interesting times. I would say a final point that I would like to make is just, again, on the scale of how big this is, Trump ran this campaign on being anti-war, right? It's America first. So what Iran has going for it is that it won't require a lot. It won't require a lot of damage for the US public to start questioning, and which they already are. Like, I would not say that a war with Iran is actually popular. in the US, right? Just based off recent polls and whatnot. But all it takes is for Iran to target one ship and lead to a mass casualty event, and this entire operation can now be viewed negatively, and it is something that Trump does not want at the moment. And again, that's why I think that they've been pushing for more and more and more, because they're just trying to ensure that there is as minimal possible chance of casualties as possible. Because Trump is dealing with a lot right now, the Epstein files and all this, and now State of Union speech is going to be happening. There was the Supreme Court case with the tariffs that has not gone his way. So Trump needs arguably some sort of distraction. And if even a handful or a few US servicemen and women die in this operation, we could see a domestic shitstorm hit Trump, right? So, yeah, the next 24 to 48 hours are going to be pivotal. But in saying that, with geopolitics, you simply never know. And especially with Trump, you just never know what can happen. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Drop a comment, ask any questions, send us a DM, subscribe to the newsletter. That's our major plug at the moment. So, yeah, thank you for that. Stay tuned for the next episode.